because today is trash day. So the trucks are really noisy. And I think they need some WD-40 on their wheels or something. It's pretty bad. So pardon, it won't last long. So pardon me if you hear that in the background. Good morning, everyone. This is exciting. I've been kind of scanning back and forth to see names and look at faces of people who have joined. As of yesterday, I believe our registration was at 144. So that is awesome. For little old Kansas, we're excited. And I'll be introducing Brianne on behalf of the Kansas Coalition on Problem Gambling. We welcome you and glad that you were able to take time out of your day to attend. This topic, as Chad said, is timely. I know in Kansas, we're grappling with legislation around sports wagering and have been since about 2018. So it's been a process. I don't know, if there are others on here from other states who are kind of in the same boat or who have just legalized sports wagering, but I think you'll hopefully glean some new information and be able to take that information and put it into practice. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Brianne. She sent me a little bio information, and I'm actually going to, I couldn't memorize it, I'm too old. So I'm actually going to read it. So give me a couple of minutes to go through this because I think you'll be very impressed with her experience and why we chose to bring her here on this topic. So Brianne Doura-Schawohl is founder of Doura-Schawohl Consulting, LLC. She most recently served as Vice President of U.S. Policy and Strategic Development for Epic Risk Management, a global harm prevention consultancy conducting work in over 24 countries. Prior to her role at Epic, Brianne served as Legislative Director for the National Council on Problem Gambling, or NCPG as we refer to it. Her experience includes a decade of leadership and advocacy, public policy, government affairs, and communications. Brianne's practice spans a wide range of work with executive and legislative branch officials and private sector stakeholders at the international, federal, state, and local levels of government. She has a history of achievements in United States congressional legislative work, including a diverse portfolio of complex problem gambling policy issues. This continues to be invaluable in her ability to make a difference on behalf of people with gambling problems around the world. Brianne works with Congress and numerous state legislators and regulators to provide expert advice on gambling policy. She continues to work with stakeholders on both sides of the aisle. Additionally, she has been featured in numerous local, state, national, and international media, including CBC, ESPN, and CNBC. Brianne was named one of the top 100 lobbyists in 2021 by the National Institute of Lobbying and Ethics, and was featured as one of the 25 people to watch in 2022 by Global Gaming Business. In 2019, she was appointed as a member of the Digital Gaming Advisory Group for the state of Hawaii and continues to serve on numerous coalitions. In 2020 and 2021, she was a guest faculty member for Seton Hall Law School at their Gaming Law Compliance and Integrity program. She continues to speak at many conferences and other public events on gaming policy in the United States, Europe, Canada, and Australia. Brianne serves as part of the leadership of the National Institute of Lobbying and Ethics Next Gen Executives Committee, a group committed to advancing educational and networking opportunities for the next generation of leaders within the government relations profession and on the National Council on Problem Gambling Military Committee. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from the University of Mary Washington, and she resides in Fairfax, Virginia with her family. I believe, Brianne, we had you here, I was trying to think, in 2019, I think, during legislative session. And she was able to do some work with the legislature, the Kansas legislature at that time. Nothing happened with our sports betting at that time, but seeds were planted. So without further ado, Brianne, I'm going to open it up to you to share your wealth of knowledge with us, please.
Oh, thank you, Carol. Thank you so much for having me. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you all for starting off your day with me today. I'm really excited to be here. As Carol said, we have a history of working together in the great state of Kansas. So while I wish I was back in Topeka, I'm excited that actually we're here virtually today so we can all be together. I see we have representation coast to coast. And I think that's really important because, you know, look, as you heard from Carol, my background is in government relations. My entire profession has been trying to perfect the 10-minute pitch that I often get with legislators. So when Carol called me up and said, you know, we're thinking a few hours, I thought, okay, you know, that's about everything opposite of what I normally do. So look, the only way that we're all going to maximize today and what we need to talk about and what I want us to learn about is if we have engagement. So as Chad said, I want you guys to raise your hands and use the chat function or just call out when I've talked about something that maybe you want some clarity on, or maybe we can share experiences about what's happened abroad. We're going to talk about, I have some friends here from the UK that have joined us. Exciting. We're going to pick on the UK a little bit. I see we've got Minnesota, Ohio just legalized, got some friends in Virginia. Good news, you guys, I'm picking on everyone when we talk about sports betting today. So, first things first, trigger warnings. I am sorry, but I want to do my due diligence and let you all know that throughout the presentation, I do have some gambling imagery. It's not a lot, but I also do have some commercials. So please be mindful of that. You know, if you need to take a step away, I completely understand. I want everyone to be well, healthy, and safe and get the most from this. I don't want to cause any problems. Also, if you just really like the Super Bowl ads and you don't want to sneak peek, I have the 3 gambling ads that are going to be a part of the Super Bowl. So if you also don't want to see them ahead of time, I'll give you a quick heads up, but it's pretty soon after we get started. Please don't be shy. I want to hear from you all. Chad, thank you for he's going to help me out with the chat. I can only be keeping eyes in so many places, but shall we get started? I think I'm going to try and share my screen now. And let's see. Can you all see that? Can I get a thumbs up? We good? All right. So what we're going to do is break today up into 3 parts. Really, we're going to be taking an examination of sports wagering across the U.S., obviously with a lens in Kansas, but what's going on? What's the state of the states? And that's going to be part 1. We're just going to dive right into the terminology. What is sports wagering? How is it being consumed? And the economic benefits of sports wagering. Then we'll take a bit of a 10-minute stretch break, maybe some questions, and then we're going to go into some problem gambling and what's happening across the US, what's happening in Kansas, what has just appeared in the realm of problem gambling policy as a result of the legalization of sports wagering. And we'll take another short break before we get into how is it that we as a nation and as 50 unique states balance these capitalist interests with our duty of care and the harm that is going to result from sports wagering legalization. So without further ado, let's start, shall we? Oh no, my chat got big. All right. Here we go. So as Carol very kindly went over my bio, I'm Brianne Doura-Schawohl. I've had the privilege of talking about problem gambling policy for 10 years at both the national and international levels. And it gives me a tremendous amount of pride to be able to join you all today. Like I said, today I want to be interactive. There is nothing worse than getting lectured at for an hour, 2, or even 3, and not feeling like you walked away with some new information or something thought-provoking about how to utilize the information you were just given in a substantive way. And so really, it will make me quite happy if you all stop me and say, this is not what I expected, this is not what I need, I would need to talk about this. That to me will be a success. So please make sure we engage. And I think the place we need to start before we start talking about sports wagering is the history of gambling in the US, because I think really it's important for us to all have an appreciation that gambling is ingrained in our culture, and it really started at the very beginning. In fact, the First Continental Congress actually used gambling as a way to fund the Revolutionary War. And it had such tremendous success, and people were so keen on raising funds and engaging with the lottery that actually gambling was used to fund other really important things like our settlements and public buildings, roads, and even some of the earliest, most prestigious colleges this country has. You may have heard of them: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, just to name a few. So it's really important that we understand that this is deeply rooted in who we are as a nation and our culture. Now, combine that with Americans' love of sports, right? Sports are also an enormous and important part of our culture. And in fact, I found this report quite interesting, and I believe the estimates are conservative given it was in 2017. But the market for professional sports within the US is roughly $69 billion. So that's 50% larger than that of Europe, Middle East, and Africa combined. Oh, how we love our sports. And it's not just professional sports, right? March Madness, anyone? We also love our sports within high schools and colleges. So what does that mean when we combine the two, gambling and sports? So up until May of 2018, there was a ban on sports wagering. It's called PASFA. And so now with the overturning in May of 2018, each state or sovereign tribal nation has the opportunity to decide if they want to legalize and regulate sports betting. Now, previous to this authorization, the American Gaming Association had estimated that the market was about $150 billion that was being wagered illegally on sports. Now, that was three and a half years ago, right? We're going to talk about how wrong the AGA was, because 151 billion in a market size, well, I've got some shocking numbers for you all. So a poll that we often reference that was conducted by the AGA kind of took an assessment about what was the interest. Okay, 151 billion roughly being wagered. So that equated to about 72% of sports fans saying that they would like to see this ban lifted. And about the assumption was about 28 million people might be more inclined to bet. So these two numbers are pretty important when I talk to you about some breaking news. But before we get into the breaking news, let's talk about what the US would stand to gain with the overturning of PASFA. So these numbers are pretty impressive, right? Total economic output, 41.2 billion. Legal sports betting operations, when we think about wages, salaries, jobs, 11 billion in total labor income. Jobs, 216,000. Sports betting contributing to 22.4 billion in US GDP. I mean, sounds pretty attractive, doesn't it? These numbers are not insignificant and have a substantial fiscal impact. But what is sports wagering, right? So let's start at the beginning. It's a form of a class 3 gaming, and it's when a wager is placed on a sporting event, professional or collegiate, or on an individual performance of an athlete or a sporting event. Now, I wish I could tell you it was that basic and that was a definition that everyone was using, except that would be way too easy. So every single state has decided to define sports wagering a little bit differently. And in some cases, we're finding the definition extends to things that have nothing at all to do with athletic events. We're seeing horse racing, greyhound racing, esports is a big one. And in some states, we could all go place a bet on the Academy Awards. And it's also not as cut and dry as I walk into a casino and there's a sports book and I place a bet. That would be retail. We also are finding it's being authorized on our lovely little phones, in kiosks, in bars, in restaurants, at the lottery agents. And we're going to talk a little bit about who's doing what and what are the implications. Now, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a quote. Now, it's not that this quote is anything that's magical or mystifying or really important. But there's something that's really important for you all to understand, that for many, many years, some of the most opposed individuals and organizations to the legalization of sports wagering were the major leagues, the professional athletics. They said that with the legalization of sports wagering, it would be the utter demise of sports as we know it. It would jeopardize integrity. It would jeopardize just the barriers that need to exist between gaming and gambling and sports. Except something happened the day PASFA was overturned. All of a sudden, people were really starting to rethink their position. And it's funny because here this seems very casual, right? This quote, the MLB is saying, I think we're ready to join in and what I think is going to be a dialogue about how sports gaming regulation in the US should be changed. Yet here we are today, 3 years later, and right down the road for me at National Stadium, an MLB team, the first ever sports book was put right in the middle of the stadium. So now not only are the lines blurred between the league and the team, but now there's an actual sports book right in the stadium, right next to where I'll go get my pretzel and hot dog to enjoy the game. So to say that the dialogue has changed is saying a lot less than actually what's precipitated. So let's move on. I was just quickly popping in. So here it is, you guys. The breaking news. Now, I know it's 48 hours old, but I still consider it kind of new. The estimates are out. For the Super Bowl this Sunday, predictions are in. 31 million Americans, that's roughly 12% of American adults, are expected to bet on the game. Remember a couple of slides ago when I said the AGA estimated that the whole market was roughly at about 151 billion and that 28 million Americans might consider betting? Well, 31 million Americans are going to bet just in one day, let alone over the course of a year. Now, if that's not staggering enough, that's going to total roughly $7.61 billion. And that's a rise of 78% from just a year ago. Now, I do not want to misrepresent at all that all of a sudden everybody's been lobbied hard that gambling is what you need to do. Some of the increase has to do with the new legalization and increased access. In 2021, 11 new states went operational for sports wagering. So people don't have to leave the state anymore if they want to place a bet. It's in their backyard, it's on their phone, it's while they're on their couch. So that is a result of legalization, that access that increased to 78%, but it's still pretty shocking numbers. And it's not just this year about how many people are going to bet and how much money. This is about to be the first Super Bowl where we have gambling ads. As many are saying in the headlines, the Super Bowl is forever changed. And let's take a look. So we've got 3 ads. 2 are going to happen in game. 1 is going to happen in the pre-show. And I don't want to set this one up too much because I think we're going to have plenty to talk about after I show it to you. I already see a nodding no head. I know. Be prepared, everyone. Here we go.
They say fortune is fickle. Wrong.
Can you hear it? I just had a thought. You can. Okay.
I just know what I like! And it ain't settling for 3. Because life's a gamble. Name is guaranteed.
Don't know why it's stopped.
Gamble. Evil. Gunning it for glory.
Guys, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Love. Gamble. So let's make it interesting. I put $1 million in up to 5 DraftKings sportsbook accounts.
Lay it all on tonight's game or kiss it goodbye.
Hello, Fortune.
Lay it all on tonight's game or say goodbye. $1 million in 5 DraftKings accounts. Think the Super Bowl's changed forever? Talk about encouraging excess. Why is it that I need $1 million to get a high by putting a little bit extra skin in the game when it comes to betting during the Super Bowl? All right, well, it's not just DraftKings I'm going to pick on. They're not alone. Let's see who else wants a little extra piece of this. Oh, Chad, it's not advancing. There we go. All right, you guys, take a look.
For all Caesars.
Just carve a turkey Caesar.
I like the way these feel. Yeah, I'm a bit of a history buff. I don't think that's true.
Okay, Mr. Buff.
Now, I know we've got some folks from New York in the room, so this is not to downplay at all. Did you see your helpline number at the end of that ad? I was excited to see that. My only concern is that I live in Virginia. And then if I'm struggling and I see that ad and I call the helpline, it's not going to help so much, is it? So those are some of the barriers we'll talk about later and about how operators are addressing marketing and advertising and helplines and all of that. But let's move on to the last ad if I can get there, shall we? I'm sorry, I'm looking at the chats real quick. I'm sorry, that is so disappointing. I don't mean to start off in a negative tone, but I did find it incredibly interesting. So let's watch this one. So this is FanDuel. FanDuel did not pay the almost $7 million for the 30 seconds of in-game, but you will all catch this one in the pregame. And you might recognize some famous faces, Caesars. We saw Halle Berry. We saw the Manning brothers. FanDuel went for the famous actress as well.
With FanDuel, you can bet $5 and win $280 cash on either team to win the Super Bowl. So,
Lady Luck. Yes, ma'am.
can take a vacation.
Ma'am, I'm just gonna check your pockets here real quick.
Oh, it's only 3 ounces.
Making the Super Bowl your luckiest day ever.
Mine too, buddy boy.
New customers can bet $5 and win $280 cash on either team to win the Super Bowl. Only on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right. So betting 5, winning 281. We all know that there's no guarantee you're going to win that 280. And then, of course, we always want to look at the fine print. Is that 280 in free bets? Because it's possible that that's how it's going to come, because that's how most promos and bonus offers are. But of course, you have to read the tiny, tiny print to find that out. So we'll talk about advertising a little bit more today, but I thought with all the hype around the Super Bowl, we're talking about 12% of American adults placing a bet. And the fact that this is the first Super Bowl of many, many to come, I'm sure, where we're going to start to see gambling ads incorporated into game day. Let's see, let's take a quick look at the chat. Not negative, it's just realistic. We need to know this. Yeah, this is what's going to happen. I'm happy to hear you say that. I also thought it's just really interesting to start off about what's happening here and now, right? This isn't speculative. This isn't what happened in the past. This is literally about to happen on Sunday. And how many of us are going to have kids joining in watching in the game, right? And we're talking about things like Lady Luck and a leprechaun and doing cool stunts. You know, we have to talk about gambling, but I'm getting ahead of myself. That's part 2 of today. So let's go on, shall we? All right. I've got some more staggering information. There's a great reporter out there, David Purdum. If you don't follow him, he writes for ESPN, for Chalk. He does a great job of covering sports betting. He also gives a ton of coverage to problem and responsible gambling issues. But I want to know what the flip is going on, because hundreds of thousands of dollars are going to be lost on the coin toss. Because yes, we are no longer just talking about sports wagering in the context of who's going to win the game. We're going to see bets on the coin toss. We're going to see bets on what color the Gatorade will be that gets tossed over someone's head. These are real bets happening every minute of the game in every sport now. And so I just figured, you know, everybody watches with trepidation, right? What's going on? Who's going to get, you know, is it heads or tails? But look at these numbers, you guys. Hundreds of thousands of dollars that are being bet for just 1 second of action. And then it will only increase from there. So we definitely need to be thinking about sports wagering, not just as the outcome of a game. We need to be thinking about everything that happens within the sport and the sporting event as being up for grabs. And I really think the flip of the coin really highlights just how big of a deal this is. So, all right, that's the Super Bowl. Let's move on. Let's talk about the US, shall we? So how is it that 31 million Americans are going to bet on Sunday? Well, 34 jurisdictions now have legalized sports wagering. That is DC and Puerto Rico included. Now, everybody lit up in bright red is operational. I saw we've got representation from Louisiana and New York, the latest to go live, same with Puerto Rico. But Nebraska and Ohio, they are 2 states that have legalized sports wagering, yet they do not have regulations up and running to be accepting bets. And then there's Florida. Oh, sweet, sweet Florida. So Florida had been accepting wagers for about 12 days before some litigation was pursued, saying that they were in violation accepting mobile bets of something known as IGRA. That's federal statute that legislates that tribes can conduct gambling on tribal lands. And because they were accepting bets not physically on tribal lands, but via a server on tribal lands, there's much dispute about the constitutionality and the legality of that. So right now, Florida will stay in a lovely shade of light red while things get litigated. And these other states in cream, Well, these are states, there are 7 of them that currently have some filed or pending legislation. And there's Kansas. There you guys are. And you have 2 versions of a bill. Now, this being said, we still know that states who have not yet hit that hue of cream are likely to. We're going to talk about some breaking headlines in a little bit. South Carolina's the gentleman looking to make a play for the governorship wants sports wagering. Kentucky has a few discussions. Texas, not till next year. They run sessions every 2 years. Maine has gone at it before, and Minnesota is looking like we might see something filed. Now, whether they actually legalize or not is to be seen, but here it is, the state of the nation, a whole lot more red than not. And so now we are talking about a lot of people with access. So I figure for some of you, this might be redundant, and so I apologize, but with sports wagering, there's a whole lot of new terminology, and there are things that I might say unintentionally or intentionally throughout this presentation that you might not know what it means. So I figured let's just cover a few basics. So I'm going to talk about handle. Handle is the amount of money that was just wagered over a period of time. When I talk about revenue, that's how much money was retained or left over after bets have been settled out. So handle's the amount of money that was wagered, but some of that money was won, some was lost, and what we have left over once all bets have been settled, we get the revenue. There's also something known as a hold percentage, and that's the amount or percent of dollars that the sports books keep. Okay. There's an integrity fee. You may have heard about this. It basically is a transfer of money from a sports book like a DraftKings or a BetMGM to a sports governing body. There's only one exception to this, and that is your neighbor, good old Missouri. So they actually had defined this integrity fee as a payout to the state for the maintenance or the building, repair of sporting venues. But while this first appeared even before the overturning of PASPA in a piece of legislation, it is really, really important to know that actually no piece of legislation has ever been signed into law that contains an integrity fee. But it doesn't mean that it's not important, because it's still very much part of the discussions around sports wagering. And seeing Kansas does not yet have legalized sports wagering, I thought you should all know about it. There's also GGR, or gross gaming revenue. All right, so there's a few important taxes that we have to talk about. And actually the excise tax is really important when we go and talk about problem gambling. But gross gaming revenue is calculated as the difference between the profit or the net profit and all the taxes that the operators are on the hook for, which is the state tax. And there's a whole bunch of different rates. And then there's a federal excise tax actually at 0.25%. Now, in a little bit, we're going to get heavy and we're going to pretend to put on our tax policy expert hats. And we're going to talk about the fact that certain states actually allow operators to deduct the excise tax. In fact, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Colorado, Oregon, Wyoming, Arizona is an error on there. I apologize before I send out this. I will remove that. But these are all states that actually allow operators to deduct excise tax. And the lovely state of Virginia also allows for a loss carryover. And we'll talk a little bit about the implications of this, because this is how we get to AGR, or adjusted gross revenue. So basically what operators do is they're allowed to calculate AGR by subtracting the amount wagered, the handle, all the winnings, and any other deduction. And in some cases, that can include the excise tax or the value of bonuses and promotions. Now, I know this was a lot. and I've got some more, so we can come back to this, but they are really important terminology that you need to become familiar with when we're going to talk about sports wagering policy. What else should we talk about? Wagers. So what's a wager? Well, it's just a bet. It's a bet placed, and it's usually expressed in a quantity, not a dollar amount. And then there's the payout. So how much you get paid out with a win. A prop bet. I get this question a lot. What's a prop bet? So actually, it's a shortened name, for a proposition bet. And this is a bet that's not tied to the actual outcome of the game. So maybe we'll see props around the performance of a team or on an individual player. Will that player make the next free throw? Will that player make a home run in the third inning? Those are types of prop bets. And then there's in-play betting. So sometimes you might hear this called live betting. And this is where betting will take place throughout the entire game. So odds that will be offered are going to change after almost every play. So this is going to be things that are constantly changing and able to be bet on within a game, which is different than in-game betting, which is just placing that bet or wager on a game while it's happening. But in-game tends to refer to, will X team win? Where in play is, will they hit the next home run? Oh, maybe not. It's more of the prop betting is what you see in play. There's also something called skins. This is a term that talks about a brand that can exist under a license. So how is it that we can see so many different brands within a state? I thought we're only going to have 5 licenses. Well, if each license can have 2 skins, now you've got, 10 brands, because skins are a brand that exists under a master license. So really important to know how many skins are being proposed or offered. The first time we saw this come up was actually in New Jersey. And it talks about the multiple skin model under there, but I'm not going to bore you with that. Affiliates. Oh, yeah, Chad, I see a question.
Yeah, there are a couple of good questions in the chat.
Great, thanks.
That probably will take a little bit of time for you I'll give you a chance to read them and respond. But the question that came out most recently was one about skins. And if you could give an example of a skin.
Sure. So if I operate Casino Y, it tends to be like I'm gonna try and not use actual casino brands because I don't want to get it wrong that someone authorized a skin. But let's say I was Casino Royal Awesome, and I was given a license in New Jersey, but I can have a skin. Another popular sports betting brand who wouldn't have otherwise be authorized to have a license, let's call them Awesome Fish. Awesome Fish now can operate sports wagering as part of my license at Casino Royal Awesome, who also might have a sports betting operation. So I might have a sports book in my casino, and also now I'm going to partner up with this sports betting operator to offer, they're going to use my license to basically gain access to the market. Does that make sense? Wow, this chat is really blowing up. Chad, do you want to, I'm not going to be able to scroll back. Do you want to tell me if there's anything else? This is great, you guys. I love to see you all talking together. I'm sorry I feel out of the loop. Please, go ahead, Chad. Tell me what's going on.
You're good. There is a question about, somebody had said, am I correct that fantasy sports are considered games of skill and do not fall under sports betting?
Yes, the age-old DFS. Is it gambling? Is it not? Is it a game of skill? Yeah, every state's different, but the consensus seems to be that it is a game of skill. It is not sports wagering. It is often legalized and regulated differently. Sometimes I will see some common themes in how it's regulated from a consumer protection side, but when it comes to the authorization and just legality of offering it, they are treated as two separate things.
Thanks,
What else is
Brianne.
going on, Chad?
Yeah, there were a couple of comments, some questions related to problem gambling. And so I think you probably will cover that topic a little bit more later in the presentation. So we'll come back to those if needed.
Okay, perfect. Then I'm going to keep moving on if everybody's good with that. All right, but Chad, interrupt me again. All right, because these are great and I can't wait to read them on the break. All right, so there's our terminology. Hopefully it helped. Let's talk about data. I don't know why it keeps moving on its own. All right, so data. I consider data to be the kind of the pulse of sports betting, right? Without data, we don't have information for our sports books to be making decisions about lines and odds and what's happening. And these are some best practices that really do help consumers through policy. You know, this data needs to be regulated just as the sports books need to be regulated. You need to understand that sports books tend to utilize multiple channels for their data. One, this helps protect when it comes to just integrity. And it also means that if one of the streams of data stops for some sudden reason, they can continue to offer their products. It also allows for good comparison's sake. So if there seems to be an anomaly, it can be flagged and for integrity issues. You know, this is actually, these data streams are how we find out what kind of offerings there are. This is what drives the catalog. In a little bit, we're going to talk about Colorado. I think I saw someone's here from Colorado. Their market is exploding around the lovely game of Russian table tennis. And it's these data providers that are the ones that are giving the feeds to these type of games. Remember when I said it would have been so easy if everybody defined sports wagering the same way? Well, every state also will, once it has its definition, will then also have something known as a catalog of what kind of games can be wagered on. And there's often a petition or a form that's filled out, gone to the commission that oversees sports wagering to see if they can offer something new, a la darts, pinball, and Russian table tennis. I'm not kidding. If there is some competition out there, people are trying to wager on it. But look, just as operators are trying to compete in their market share, there's also a lot to be said about those data providers, and without them and their reliability and their innovation, that could also be a bad thing for both operations and consumers alike. But there is an elephant in the room, and while I know I'm not supposed to be talking about problem gambling, I can't see any other way around it than to talk about the headline from Genius Sports yesterday with the NFL. So we're going to talk about it now, and you'll have to apologize for me giving a teaser about problem gambling. But like I said at the start of this slide, data, it's the pulse of sports betting. But what came out in a very public, well, it's now public thanks to the media, right? In a quarterly investors call, was just highlighting that actually data streams do a whole lot more than just let you know what's happening play by play in a game. What they are doing is they've refined the way to use that data to encourage player engagement and actually personalize how people are betting and encouraging them to bet in a way that they are anticipating or that they enjoy. And I have to tell you guys, consumer groups blew up yesterday, and maybe rightfully so, because well, we all know that cookies exist, and I will get ads because I bought the Honest & Co. diapers for my daughter last week, and now Target knows that and is going to flood every coupon. There's also something about using that data, right, while you're betting to encourage maybe reckless betting or excessive betting. And so really the question begs, and I don't think it's a question, but many are starting to question, what role do data providers also have in harm prevention? And how is it that they can use their data for good in handing it over to operators? And then, of course, though, it's only as strong as what the operators choose to do with that information, right? If the operator chooses to use that information that someone loves a certain type of betting and this is their behaviors around it, and, you know, they have to own some of that responsibility as well. But I think there's some real opportunity here that data could be researched and structured for a lot of good consumer interactions. And then there's also improper and bad consumer interactions as it relates to these data feeds and streams. I hope that makes sense. Data and adjusted gross revenue and promo and bonus deductions are a little bit more nuanced and complicated. I'd never want to oversimplify, but I just think that it's important for us to be mindful that it's not just the gaming operators that are feeding into certain behaviors, good and bad. It's also actually starting right from those data streams for the games. So the National Council on Problem Gambling, they have this study out, it's called Engage, and it looks at the behaviors and attitudes around sports wagering and in fantasy sports. Now, in a little bit, when we talk about problem gambling, we're going to talk about what that survey showed, but that's not what I actually want to talk about right now, because I think there are two other really salient pieces of information that we garnered from the survey that just talks about the consumer in general and who wants to sports bet and what do they look like. And we learned two things. We learned that these are social people. So 92% of people like sports wagering and have been doing so against friends, family, colleagues. It's a social thing. It's an ego thing. It's a passion thing. It's a little bit of fun thing. This was not something being done in isolation as of now, right? Because we didn't really have the opportunity to do it alone on our phones from our couch anytime, day or night. But the other thing we learned is that the majority of people were actually going to casinos for social reasons. They wanted to have drinks and eat dinner and visit with folks. So, you know, there's been a lot of talk within the industry about this fear of cannibalization, that there was only a finite amount of dollars available for gambling, and that with the legalization of sports wagering, it would be a detraction from the brick and mortar casinos. But what we've learned in the short 3 years is actually that's not the case. Cannibalization didn't really happen. In fact, from these two graphs, we can see brick and mortar casinos are doing just fine. And that the sports books, that adding that extra element of social engagement with love of gambling and sports, was just another venue and probably bringing in a whole new demographic of customers. You know, when we think about the average patron to a casino, we aren't thinking necessarily that 21 to 40-year-old individual. We aren't thinking about a night out. And now all of a sudden we are seeing a whole new demographic of gamblers. And in some cases, they are going to the casinos so they can go to that sports book. But a lot of industry fears, or even state fears, that if they were to authorize sports wagering, it would detract or take away from the success of the brick and mortar, has all really fallen to the wayside. It's a whole different group, and all is doing well in the gambling space. I would argue too well. So here we are, state of the nation. We got 34 jurisdictions. Over 55% of the US population now have access to sports betting. Like I mentioned earlier, 11 states went live with sports wagering last year, and 25 of the 34 have some iteration of online or mobile. And I'm sure it's no surprise to any of you, and we'll talk about that in a bit. Online and mobile comes with increased risk. That amalgamation of access and excitement and ease, it can be a very destructive and deadly storm. But there we have it, 25 jurisdictions, they've got it. And in fact, 2 states, Wyoming and Tennessee, they have mobile only. And now that was done with a little bit of intent, I want to say, just as gaming or gambling is regulated on a state-by-state basis, so too is sports wagering. And sometimes they're making decisions based upon what the state already has by way of gambling infrastructure. And Tennessee does not actually have any casinos. So it didn't make sense to do a New Jersey model per se, right? Where now you've got a casino with a sports book, or and they chose not to go the Virginia way in my lovely state. And I see some friends from Virginia on here. We got a casino, iLottery, and a sports wagering package all at once. So anyway, Tennessee made the decision to do it mobile only. Although I have to say, they have made some interesting decisions where they have a payday lender as a parent company to a sports betting operator now, where they are accepting individuals to be able to make a deposit under their sports betting accounts or for their sports wagering accounts at the payday lending facility. So let's just say everybody's got kind of an interesting approach and maybe some less than desirable decisions that they've been making as it pertains to this. But look, the AGA had said when I started off on a survey that they estimated 28 million people might be inclined to bet on sports. And we know that that's already been blown out of the water on one day for gaming. They also said that it might be a $151 billion market. Here's the really shocking thing, you guys. Now, all the state dollars have not been reported for revenue yet for January. The thing that happened 11 days ago. And yet it is now official in saying that the handle for sports wagering in 1 month's time has blown $100 billion. $151 billion market size. What are you talking about? $100 billion a month. What is February going to look like with wagering on the Super Bowl? That is just an enormous amount of engagement in gambling. And here's some more jarring numbers if that doesn't scare you enough. September, October, November, December, and January. New Jersey, the tiny little state of New Jersey, they brought in over $1 billion in handle. Just that one little state. In November, I see some good friends from Pennsylvania on here. Hello. We saw them generating $761 million in handle. In Colorado, we're seeing most of the handle come in month to month from 96 to 98% just on their mobile bets. And they hit a record for revenue of $28.62 million. Arizona, a state that has much contention around it and questions about if they legalize and authorize correctly, giving preference to only certain number of their tribes that already have gambling in the state and giving preferential treatment to teams and the leagues and stadiums. It's kind of a mess. But the one thing everybody agreed on is that it would be a pretty large market. And man, they weren't kidding. $777 million in 2 months. And the other thing, living in a state that doesn't yet have legalized sports wagering, is that there have been some really interesting studies being commissioned around examining gross gaming revenue, adjusted gross revenue, and engagement. And so they're finding that when states lower the tax liability, and when they allow for deductions like promotions and bonuses, and they allow for the excise tax to get deducted, all the states are performing in the top of the nation when it comes to handle. So lower taxes, more people are gambling, more money. The Tax Foundation and the National Conference of State Legislators did a study saying that the 5 states with the highest handle per capita all have really low tax rates. So why am I yakking your ear off about taxes? Why do I now study tax policy more than I have ever decided? Because it's having some really serious implications on the funds for items that were allocated to be the beneficiaries of the revenue from sports wagering. And so let's talk about these promo and bonuses. These are things that say $1,000 risk-free bet, or we'll match your bet today. This is what all of the operators do the minute a new market opens in this race for customer acquisition. That's what it is. It's the ultimate marketing tool to get people in the door. And it's so big right now. I cannot emphasize that enough, that betting companies since 2019 have excluded more than $336 million just tied to this free-to-play offers. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being offered all the time in free-to-play just to get customers through the door. And because states are saying, okay, you're not paying taxes on all of that money that you offered up or that you potentially lost, the cuts the states are getting are significantly lower than initial projections. So in the great state of Virginia, 2.5% of state revenue is supposed to come or go for problem gambling services. But if the state is taking in a significant loss or significantly less than projected, because not only do they allow operators to write off promos and bonuses, they also have a loss carryover. So too is a problem gambling fund now having a lot less funds in it than originally anticipated at the start of legalization, or what was projected. And so now all of a sudden, from a policy standpoint for problem gambling, we have to care very much about how the money is coming and from which pot and at what time, because if it is the state's revenue after deductions have been accounted for, there could be significantly less for vital programs, as had hoped. How are we doing on questions, Chad? We doing all right? All right. So we've got a couple more minutes and then we're going to take our first break, if that's all right. But look, I hope it's clear by now in realizing that there are no 2 states that are doing this the same way, just as no 2 states had embarked upon gaming and gambling regulation or authorization the same way. And so just because some are doing adjusted revenue, others are not, as you can see from this lovely little chart, there's different win rates, there's different handles, but all are really important to have an understanding because, one, your state doesn't have it yet, so it would be important to know what that might look like, and we're going to talk about that. But I'm pretty sure people in Kansas also travel, and so what they are experiencing and how they're engaging with gambling products is going to vary state to state. And the gambling and their problems perhaps don't stay where they were, they follow them home. And so that's why I think it's really important that we all have an understanding of what the heck is going on. And so here's another cool little outline about which states have chosen only to offer sports wagering in a brick and mortar way, others that have decided to do this hybrid retail and mobile, and then of course our 2 friends in Tennessee and Wyoming. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Wyoming. I'm going to pick on them in a little bit because they also did something else pretty crazy. And guys, it's not just the consumption and retail versus mobile and do you allow for college betting or not. We've got states that allow 18-year-olds to bet on this. Yes, I said class 3 gaming at the onset, but there are states that have, similar to what's being proposed in Kansas, although full disclosure, they are wanting a 21 plus age to bet in Kansas. But there are states where sports wagering is run by the lotteries. And so we are finding that in those jurisdictions, Oregon is an exemption from this, that are offering sports wagering at 18 plus, just as lottery products are offered at 18 plus. So also important to know that your Kansas college students, when they go to another state, might actually have gotten a taste of sports betting while they were gone. What's the big deal? What about colleges? So it's one of the most polarizing topics. Do you or don't you? Virginia actually, in fact, just had a bill this session about whether or not they should lift the ban on in-state wagering. And actually, there's not a whole lot of research out there to substantiate that if you were to legalize in-state wagering, that you're at greater risk for necessarily integrity breaches or even increased addiction. Once one state had the authorization and legalization of college sports betting, we were opening ourselves up to liabilities around integrity breaches and increased addiction. These are young children who make no money playing these sports. So of course, there are vulnerabilities and potentials for match fixing or being paid off to throw a game and then not understanding the implications. They're also poor college kids, right? We also need to talk about their mental health and well-being. My phone and my Twitter doesn't know a state boundary. Just because I might not be able to place a bet in the state of Virginia on a Virginia school doesn't mean I can't be in the great state of Ohio and threatening that Virginia athlete online. That threat is still very much real. And how is a college athlete going to deal with that? So for me, it's not about the market access. It's not about increase per se in integrity breaches or in addiction rates because it's happening within the state. Like I said, the first state that moved on that was what opened the floodgates for integrity and addiction. And it's only going to be here to stay and get worse as colleges start to form partnerships with gambling operators and no one is authorizing or mandating that education around mental health and addiction happen for our college athletes. So it's on the horizon. I saw North Carolina's here. It looks like you guys might move again this next session. We'll see. Futile attempts were made last year, but it is a favored state to go next. Ohio, we'll see some regulation soon. Massachusetts, who knows? They've gone 3-4 times now. People want it, but they might not have the political ability to get it done. Oklahoma, they actually just introduced a bill yesterday that might allow for in-person sports wagering within facilities that also have charitable purposes. So talk about opening the doors up in the floodgates. And it's not just states that haven't moved yet. There are states like Virginia, South Dakota, Iowa that are basically going in and having to clean up and propose amendments to what they had already legalized. And it's not just the states that care. There's also a bill that's been filed at the federal level. This would only deal with sports wagering within tribal lands, but I wanted you all to know that there is also some discussion, although quite small, happening in Congress around this important issue. And like I said, I'm in Virginia. I didn't just get sports wagering. I got mobile, I got casinos, I got it all. And we're not alone. Online gaming happened in Michigan at the same time sports wagering happened. There are aggressive attempts to legalize online gaming. A slot machine in your pocket is what I call it in Indiana and Iowa. 6 states have it already, you guys. Esports. It's a big thing in Europe and they want it to become a big thing here as quickly as possible. Crypto, the Nationals, an MLB team signed their first ever partnership deal yesterday with a crypto company. And Wyoming regulated crypto within their sports wagering regulations. cashless. When we talk about promos, we'll talk more about cashless, but there is this rush, this COVID, to allow for betting to now happen all electronically and cashless, because cash is dirty and evil, right? And so what are the implications of that? And of course, iLottery, getting lottery products on our phone. So 5 minutes over, although we didn't start right at the top of the hour, so I'm hoping we did okay. I've thrown a lot at you. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I figure let's take a 10-minute stretch break. I'll stay here and look about questions. And when we come back, we'll talk all things now problem gambling. Thanks for hanging in there with me, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Brianne.
Did sports wagering. Is the legalization centered around the location of the bettor or the location of the handler or the company that takes the bet?
Great question. Okay, so how it works when it comes to legalization of sports wagering is the location of the person accepting the bet and the bettor. So I can only place a bet in Virginia when I'm in the state of Virginia with a Virginia operator. So both the operator or the gaming provider and I have to be in Virginia at the same time. If I were to go to Kansas right now, even though I'm a Virginia resident, I couldn't, and have the Virginia gambling apps on my phone, I could not place a bet while in Kansas. I have to physically be in Virginia to place that bet. Now, that being said, there are plenty of sites that are not actually legal or regulated that people are able to place bets on any state, whether it's legal or not, anytime. That's how the AGA and other entities had an idea of the size of the black market, as we call it, because we know that underground sports wagering has been happening on phones and apps and computers. But when we're talking about the legal regulated market, both the bettor and the operator have to be within the state boundaries. And there's this amazing company out there, GeoComply. They actually have an entire responsible gambling charity arm to them called Conscious Gaming that has technology out there like for geolocation to ensure that everybody's being truthful about where they are and if they're allowed to legally be placing their bet. There are other geolocation providers. They just happen to be the biggest one in the market. So they're also dear friends. They do good work and they help keep everyone safe and protected. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you very much.
Of course. Does anyone else have any questions before we get started? The next section I feel like might be a little repetitive for a few of you. I'm looking at you, Scott, Liz, Hannah, Carol. I've got of course, the map about the fractured state of problem gambling, but I hope some of it is worth revisiting and I hope it's helpful. Oh, I see.
This is Craig Johnson from Minnesota. I do have a question. In
Please.
all of these legislation that has gone on, what percentage of tax revenue is being earmarked for treatment?
Great question. So there are many states who have done nothing, and every state has chosen to earmark something different for problem gambling services. In a perfect world, it shouldn't just say treatment, right? What we advocate for, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, is research, prevention, treatment, and recovery. There are states like Michigan put $1 million from revenue for problem gambling. DC and New Hampshire put in 200,000. Virginia did 2.5%. Your bills in Kansas, one has a 2% proposal and one has nothing. So
I'm in Minnesota, and one of the part of the dialogue that I hope we have with our legislators is just what will that look like? If we're talking about billions and billions, $1 million is nothing.
Of course.
200,000, as we all know. So to me, that's a huge part of this issue.
Sure. And that's fair. I have to say, I've testified in your great state twice. I've enjoyed coming up there. I hope I get to come back and continue to advocate for those that will suffer harm from legalized gambling. The other complication is that you're in a state with very strong tribal gaming, right? And so the compacts will often also articulate exactly if anything goes over for problem gambling. And so it is not as cut and dry. But as I say, if you profit from this, then you have to pay to help mitigate and reduce the risk that will come from this. And that's the state included. They're profiting. There's revenue to be gained.
That's my point. The tribes
Yeah.
have really good lawyers and they created good compacts.
Yes,
But
they
this
did.
is as the legislators legalize this, in my view, it falls on the legislators to say of this, whether the tribes want to contribute or not isn't the point. A large percentage of the money that will be generated from sports betting is going to go into the state's checking account.
Yes.
And it's the state's responsibility, once again, in my opinion, if they legalize this, they need to stand up and take responsibility for what they're legalizing. I don't think I'm preaching to the choir, but
yes. And I hope you use that passion that when it comes up in a committee hearing that you go down there and tell them that, because remember, they work for you. And so you deserve to have your voice heard, and there's plenty of research out there to substantiate why they should do that. So great question, great commentary. Love to talk about Minnesota more anytime. Just let me know. Jerry brings up Mattress Mac. You're right, Mattress Mac. A gentleman just placed over $4 million on the Super Bowl, you guys, and he had to drive over to Louisiana because he lives in the great state of Texas to get it done. And in fact, he put so much money on the game with Caesars. I wish I had saved that tweet, darn. And he actually had to put it in a series of different bets because they couldn't take that large of a bet all at once. But yeah, Mattress Mac, I've talked to the press about this gentleman a couple of times. He obviously is in a position where he can afford to be making bets this large, but the question is, should he? I guess that's subjective. But look at this, you guys. Kim says 2.1 million of the general fund for prom gambling services in Nevada. Yes. Minnesota. Yes. Hi, Susan. Thanks for being here. They are looking at 1%. Let's hope they actually do it. And it's not after the promo deductions. Ann and I have that problem in Virginia. All right, guys, keep the questions coming. Chad, you're going to help me by looking at that chat, right? It appears I can't multitask as much as I'd really like to. Let's get going. All right. So we just heard about all of the great things that come for the economy from sports wagering, right? Consumers love it. There's a huge market. Operators are profiting like crazy. Why am I concerned? Well, about 2 million Americans meet the criteria for a gambling addiction, with another 4 to 6 million being at risk. And by the way, this is conservative. Why is this conservative? The federal government has actually never bothered to invest in looking into the national prevalence of this addiction. And research shows very emphatically that anytime we introduce new forms of gambling, we also increase problems. So last time these estimates were put out there, there were not things like iLottery. There were not things like kiosks for the lottery, and there certainly weren't opportunities to do sports betting at your local gas station. So these are conservative, and we have reason to believe that we should be very concerned about the individual who is really attracted to sports wagering. And look, like I said, those estimates are conservative. Certain states, like Kansas, have decided to actually commission and pay for a prevalence study to see really what they were looking at by way of individuals struggling within their own backyard. And as you heard earlier, I don't know if we have anyone from New Jersey. I do apologize, I'm picking on your lovely state, but they are performing in the billions of dollars every month, you guys, for sports wagering. But look at how many people have a gambling addiction in the state. 6% of adults are thought to have a gambling addiction within the state. How has that number, well, what do we think has happened to that number since the introduction of sports wagering? Because this was done predating online and sports wagering. The latest iteration is to come out soon. And from what I'm being told, it could be even more staggering. 6% though is 2 to 3 times the perceived national average. Kansas, seeing we're doing a presentation for Kansas, I just want to note it's about 2.7% considered to be at high risk for a gambling disorder. And here is your survey. Other things that I thought were interesting, about 10.1% of participants would have been considered to be moderate risk. So the question becomes, if you're at moderate risk and then you're inundated with marketing and promos and bonuses, and the state is not able to match services and counteracting with awareness campaigns, what's that going to do? It's going to propel you right onto the high risk category, which is why it's so important that when we legalize, we're equally meeting the supports for harm prevention. Anyway, other statistics that I don't want to read everything to you guys, but I thought that were interesting and important to note. Of those who reported any gambling in the past 30 days, just over 6% were in the high problem gambling risk category, with 17.4 at moderate risk. So things aren't exactly great, right? There's a fair number of individuals within the state that are already struggling or at significant risk to be struggling. What's going to happen with the introduction of a new form of gambling that's in everyone's home all the time on demand? I'm going to keep going. I see there's 2 new chats though. So Chad, all right. So look, I'm picking on Kansas. We're talking about Minnesota. You're not alone. Now, how I so wish that it was already May, not just because, I'm already over all the snow, but there will be a new survey out. This survey was last conducted in 2016 and gave an overview of the problem gambling investment and infrastructure across the US. So to say it's outdated is probably accurate, but it's what we have. Unfortunately, as you can see, the investment made to this issue is infinitesimally small, with an average of only 37 cents in states that have funding at all, and there were only 40 that had funding. 9 states did 0 commitment, and of course, there's no federal funding, which means there's no match grants. Things that we see available in states when we're talking about alcohol and substance abuse doesn't exist for problem gambling. And I think to put it into greater context for people, we're seeing that substance abuse is 334 times more funded than, say, problem gambling, yet it is only got a prevalence of 3.8 times greater. So the disparity with the funding is pretty staggering. I really love staggering numbers. That's what I've decided. So back to that engaged survey, right? We talked about that snapshot of who's a sports bettor, and we learned that actually it's about people were spending money at casinos because they like the socialization, and that people who were sports betting were doing it in social circumstances with their friends and their family. Well, we learned a lot of other things too in this survey, and a second iteration is coming out soon. I'm really excited, but let's talk about the one that is out. This is one that I think every person who wants to talk about sports betting needs to know about. This engaged survey showed that problematic gambling activity amongst sports bettors was almost twice the problematic behaviors of other gamblers. So sports bettors are saying they, at almost twice the rate, they need to gamble more for more what? For more. They're relying on others at 2.5 times the rate to pay off debts or to pay for their gambling. 2.5 times the rate, sports bettors are lying and hiding their gambling. Or 2.5 times greater, feeling restless or irritable when they try to stop. So this demographic is engaging in more problematic behaviors around sports wagering than other gamblers. So one would argue we would need 2.5 times the resources to be able to mitigate and reduce the harm that is clearly coming at us like a 2-ton truck. We also learned from this survey, and something that goes to Craig's point about what's the state doing, that actually the majority of people surveyed felt that the government should in fact be doing more. They also believe that the operator should be doing more. I'm going to argue that if you profit from this or you benefit in any way, you have to be doing more, because we definitely aren't doing enough. We weren't doing enough to begin with. And now we know that this is a more vulnerable demographic, so everyone better really up their game. But that's not what's actually been happening. But survey says people think we should be doing more. And we need to tell our legislators and our regulators and our community folks that we need to be doing more. What else did we learn about the sports bettor? So sports betting does appear to come with a higher risk of problematic play. And no surprise to many of you probably, but that means our young adults. They were already impulsive anyway. We know that the younger someone is exposed to gambling, the more predisposed they are to developing an addiction later in life and struggling. And so this is kind of that perfect collision here, this allure and passion of the sports and the gambling, the ease and the access, the lack of education around the fact that gambling does come with risks and can be addictive. No surprise, the young adults are at greater risk of problematic play. Now, for many of us that are in the prevention space, we understand the value of targeted campaigns, right? Cultural understanding, nuances, understanding that certain types of gambling were riskier for certain groups, whether that be gender or sex, or whether that be race. But the one thing that we're starting to understand about sports wagering is it kind of throws that out of the water, that all of a sudden the white, affluent, well-educated male is a vulnerable person when it comes to engaging in problematic play with sports wagering. In fact, I just got off a call yesterday with someone in Connecticut who said that helpline calls since legalization are up over 30% in the young male demographic. So really, there's no evidence that the risks of problematic gambling are affected by the socioeconomic status. You know, we've often heard for many years about lottery products being in the lower economic communities. That's not the case here, or by racial or ethnic background. So the campaigns need to become universal now. How do we talk to the general public about this potentially harmful product? And the thing that probably frustrates me the most is that we are not the first to embark upon this legalization of sports wagering. The UK, Australia, Spain, Italy, just to name a few. And the thing that's most frustrating is that they are under tremendous amount of scrutiny and pressure and regulatory overhaul around this topic of online and sports. Why, you ask? Problem gambling. The amount of harm that has come to these countries because the sports wagering and online gaming operations went mostly unchecked. Now, the one thing that we really should be utilizing is the research that's starting to come out of these countries now around this, and looking at where their policies went wrong and trying to improve upon them. But in such a gold rush-like mentality, with COVID revenue numbers really pinching states' purses, everybody just ran to legalize without actually doing their homework. And so the real fear is that we're going to find ourselves in the exact same position. So let's talk a little about what's happening at the international level. I do love, we're going to talk in a little bit more about advertising and what's happening here, but the UK Gaming Commission did identify that advertising really does have an impact on motivating gamblers. So the more you see it, the more you're encouraged to do it, the more offers you're given, the greater the chance you're going to gamble. I mean, a third of the gamblers, all based on advertising, not an insignificant number here, especially when they've got 55,000 children with a gambling addiction now, or 300 to 400,000 adults that also have one. And remember, it's not just the individual with the addiction that's struggling. There's also 8 to 10 other people around that one person who are also negatively impacted. I mean, we're talking about 4 million potential people in the UK who are being impacted by this. Spain, they went and recently banned gambling sponsorships on jerseys for football or soccer. They also decided they were done with the gambling ads on radio and TV. And those promo bonuses that I talked about, everybody's deducting here from the state cut. Yeah, well, they aren't even allowed anymore in Spain. Australia, they've also done a lot of restrictions on advertisements. They were particularly worried about the influence on children. And Australia and now the UK are banning credit cards as being a form of acceptable payment with sports wagering. In fact, the UK even took it a step further recently by banning the utilization of payment through an e-wallet that could be funded by a credit card, because they have been able to link significant harm with the utilization of credit cards for gambling. I wish a state or two had picked up the phone and called some folks in the UK. So where did this go wrong from a policy standpoint? So the UK Gaming Act that's being reviewed right now was very interesting. It even called out problem gambling and harm from gambling. But the way that the statute was written is it had put all of the ownership on the operators, saying that the operators needed to ensure that there was a reduction or as minimal harm as possible. Why would you put the operators in charge of that? They're not experts in harm reduction from their products. So there really lacked substantive considerations for problem gambling harms. And it was a whole lot of, no, you do it, not my problem. Everything was centered around market access and tax structure. Does that sound familiar to what we just talked about for an hour? Market access is everything here in the US. There were little to no advertising guidelines or restrictions. Occasionally in states, I'm seeing things like, I won't target minors, or you're not encouraging excessive play. Well, that's subjective, because if I'm being, confronted with $1,000 risk-free bet, I think there's a lot to be desired by way of our advertising guidelines. And the UK also found themselves in that similar situation. There was already poor problem gambling supports and infrastructure to begin with. 37 cents is an average per capita investment the US makes. I wouldn't consider that significant. There was a considerable amount of lack of collaboration and coordination, similar to what we see here in the US. If it's not happening in my state, I don't want to hear about it, which is why I'm so thrilled to see so many of you not from Kansas on this call, so we can talk about what's happening in neighboring states. And frankly, not just about the bad things that are happening, but at the end of my call to action, which is why I'm hoping Liz Lanza stays on, I'm going to talk about how amazing Pennsylvania is. And she's doing it at the regulatory level. It's not even what her legislators did or did not do. There's some really good things happening. And the only way we know is when we cross state lines and we go and listen about it. There's so little research here in the US, and the UK is only starting to get it now, and Australia, as a result of all the harm, and they have to invest in how to actually undo all the damage that they have caused. And then these last two are trends within operations that we have got to get a handle on and get a handle on now. And that's cashless wagering, the utilization of credit cards, and the encouragement for in-play and online gaming. Because again, this amalgamation of action and access and ease, all doing it on my credit card, what does that mean for harm rates? Our chat, I see some chat's going. Are we still okay? All right.
Yeah, it looks like there's good discussion in there, especially about former athletes at possibly being at higher risk, and but it seems like it's all fitting well with the presentation that you're sharing.
Well, athletes are, right? Because what makes them a tremendous athlete, that drive, that wanting to win and perform, makes them an incredibly risky gambler because they don't like to lose, right? So what are one of the signs? They weren't going to chase their losses. Also, it's a complete game changer for athletes now, especially starting at the collegiate level, where now all of a sudden they're being bet on. So if you want to watch your games, now all of a sudden on the side, you're seeing all the lines and the odds. And sure, the NCAA has this whole, no, you can't bet on anything that you, as in the playoffs, right? There are very clear guidelines, but it's a game changer for athletes because they're now being bet on. And also, colleges in general are starting to form partnerships with gambling operators to talk about mixed messages. And there's nothing saying athletes can't bet on other things other than sports wagering. So that's where you get these loopholes, like, is DFS different than sports betting? So yeah, we are worried about athletes. One of my clients and someone that I did work with that Carol mentioned at the start, Epic Risk Management, they actually have a program that they just announced with the NCAA where they are going and speaking to colleges and college athletes and coaches and staff about the dangers of gambling and gambling addiction and what that means for their athletes. And so much more work needs to be done in this realm, but you got to start somewhere, right? So great question, great point. These are the things we need to be talking about. So here it is, my top five, the top 5 ways I see we're making the same mistake. So we're going to end up, God, I hope not, but I fear, with 55,000 children with a gambling addiction, because we've already got this poor infrastructure to start. And now we're just exploding with this proliferation of gambling, and we aren't meeting those problem gambling needs simultaneously. We have passed this legislation so quickly that we have forgotten to define certain things or talk about what it means when we allow for kiosks, or what does cashless, or what is a prop bet, or are we going to allow betting on the Olympics? Like, there are just so many things that people realize they didn't carve out and decide the first time. And it's come at a really high cost. Again, there's no coordination and cooperation. I'm finding a lot of finger pointing. Oh, well, don't worry. We don't have to increase the taxes for problem gambling. I give the local council $10,000. That's good, right? I do my part. I'm off the hook. Not to pick on anyone, but that's not okay. That's not enough. The other thing too is we have a big crisis of helplines right now. There's 25 of them in the nation. And so, as I pointed out on that second ad of the Super Bowl, I'm sitting in Virginia. I love to see the New York helpline, but I can't really get help. So what are we going to do? Self-exclusion is worse than helplines. In some states, there is a no self-exclusion program. It's left up to every operation. In others, it's all state run. In certain states, there's 5 lists. It's very fractured right now. And anytime there's fracturing and disjointedness, it's going to cause issues, especially for the consumer and the person that needs help. And that's what we need to move towards, a person-centric approach to gaining help and access. There's so little research and funding. We need more research, because research should inform our policies and our decisions. And right now we're having to rely on the international markets who are different than us. Like, yes, I'm going to say we need to move away from that American exceptionalism. We aren't all that great and unique and wonderful that none of this harm is going to come. But we are different in many ways. We don't have a public health system the way the UK does, right? It's not federalized. So we do need insights into the uniqueness about the American culture and the American policies to help us better strengthen our approach to problem gambling. And it's not going to look identical to Italy, Spain, or the UK, but that's all we got right now, because no one in the US is really making a significant investment in this research. And then, of course, the cashless wagering. I think COVID was the beginning of opening up the floodgates. Cash is dirty. We should move to cashless. But cashless really does come with increased risk. It comes with increased risk when we're shopping too, right? Let's not believe gambling is very unique here. People spend a lot more than they intend because it can do what? One click buying on Amazon. See, you guys, I'm an equal opportunist. I'll pick on everybody. It's not just gambling operators. And it comes with a lot of great things, but it also comes with a lot of unintentional harm. And so how do we counteract that? How do we countermeasure these new trends in technology with education and empowerment for the consumer base? So those are my top 5. I see 7 chats. Chad, what are we doing? We good?
Yeah, it looks like it's going well. And I didn't know if anybody wanted to open their mic and share, but more comments about college athletes and betting, sports betting. And then Robert had shared, I think a major policy initiative should be not allowing colleges and universities and the NCAA from partnering with the gambling, marijuana, and alcohol industries. So that it expands, but it was right in line with some things as you were saying them as far as the policy initiatives.
Oh, Robert, how I wish the NCAA could do that. It is out of their control, unfortunately. So the fact that we're about to talk about it, right? LSU becomes the first school to partner, first SEC school. In fact, Colorado gets to take the cake there. They were the first school to partner University of Colorado with PointsBet. That is going to be the future right now, unless there are some regulations put in place. I just talked about how Spain.
Can I ask a question about that?
Of course.
All these schools take federal money, though. Can't, if Congress or the United States government made some regulation that you couldn't partner with any of these entities and accept federal money, wouldn't that be one way to kind of deal with this?
Oh, yeah. If Congress were to get involved and put in any parameters or regulations around gambling, absolutely. The problem is the federal government doesn't touch gambling at all. Only when it comes to tribal gaming and IGRA, which I talked a little bit about, but that is like a whole other 3-hour, 6-hour seminar in itself. And the feds don't even talk about gambling addiction. And so I can assure you that there is nothing, literally nothing, that the industry cares about more than keeping the federal government out of regulating gaming. So I work with Congress very closely and daily to try and get some federal recognition for gambling addiction. The likelihood of seeing the feds in the near future doing something like that pragmatically, realistically, when we talk about the money that the industry can use to lobby against that, is just highly unlikely. So I think right now it's more about how do we exist within this new ecosystem and with these new partnerships. Do I feel that we're 1 or 2 or 3 scandals away from the feds wanting to cut it off? Yes. The sad reality is, how do we reduce that human cost that's going to come until the feds do intervene? Does that make sense? Probably not the best answer you want to hear, but.
No, I mean, I totally understand what you're saying and you're coming from. I know somebody in the chats were blowing up said that gambling is a states' right, which I agree to, but I also think that and you're right, Congress and the government really doesn't want to get involved in a lot of this stuff, and they kind of just turn a blind eye. But if they said, well, you could do what you want, but we're not going to allow you to accept, student loan money from the government or any of these other, federal money for research or things like that, a lot of these universities would probably stop doing that, almost like what they do with the marijuana industry. You can't use banks and stuff because it's illegal. So if they wanted to get involved in some of these regulations and I'm really only advocating for the kind of the student environment of it, not even talking about getting involved in some of the other aspects of it, but, just kind of like, it's crazy you have these 18 and 19-year-old kids who are going through enough stuff trying to go in school and play sports. And now they're, sports gambling is legal, and the universities that they're playing for are partnering with all these addictive industries like alcohol, marijuana, and gambling. And, we're asking these young people to kind of, navigate all of that without any real resources.
Exactly right. I think the end part of your statement is where we have the most opportunity. That's where we as stakeholders in this ecosystem can speak up. All right, fine, maybe we can't stop you from doing this no matter how much we see it as a dangerous decision. But what you could do is mandate education for every student starting from a young age to talk about this issue of gambling the way you talk about alcohol. I know that my son is learning that if he ever smokes a puff of a cigarette, that he could become addicted and it's bad for his health. I know that my son at the age of 8 is getting curriculum around alcohol, but nobody's talking to him about gambling or that it comes with risks and is only meant to be done as entertainment by an adult. But sure enough, we live in Virginia and he sees about 300 DraftKings, BetMGM, and PointsBet commercials when we're watching, a major network. In fact, we were over our friend's house just last weekend and he was flipping through the channels and I noticed that there were actually channels run by some of the sports books where I could have watched the game on their broadcast on their channel. It was like the DraftKings network. And so I think in this day and age, and where it seems highly unlikely that these partnerships are going to stop, in fact, I think they're only going to increase, it's about what about those resources that need to come packaged with it? You want to lift the ban on in-state betting? Okay, and that's going to come with now mandatory training and supports for every college athlete in the great state of Virginia. It's going to have to become a package deal. As Craig said, how much is the state putting aside for problem gambling? Now we got to start thinking about targeting those college athletes and what services and resources they need as part of a package if the state's going to allow for this. Great questions, great points. Thank
Brianne,
you. Yeah.
Brianne, quick question on this move. Well, trying to move away from cashless gambling and betting. I see this as a huge concern because, in a great world, we could move away from cashless and convince legislators to do so when it comes to gambling, to make it more difficult for people with problems or addiction to gambling to do so, where they have to actually go to a facility to do that. Having said that, I think it'd be naive of us to think that that's going to happen or even last if it does, because we're moving to a cashless society as a world. Other nations, very prominent developed nations, are not going to be far behind China moving to a cashless society. And so I guess my question is, what kind of advice or insight do you have for those of us, trying to advocate and work with our respective state legislators to convince them if you're not going to jump on board with, moving as far away as possible from cashless and you're going to move to cashless, how are we going to regulate this? Because it's a no-brainer that even though there's laws against it, the government, state and federal, have the ability and has had the ability for so long to control your bank accounts, to do anything they want with your technology, despite privacy acts and stuff like that. So it's like a perfect storm.
It is a perfect storm, but it's a great question. And while I know I have obviously given you all some reasons to pause or have concern around cashless, I also want to highlight, and you're letting me do that now, thank you, that there is tremendous opportunity with this technology. The first being that all of this technology also affords consumers to be actually more empowered and informed about their decisions and how it's being spent. So if cashless is going to happen, then people should be getting real-time data feeds and information about how much they're spending. Also, You know, another thing about cashless is we need to normalize some of these responsible gambling features for betting. So everybody comes into my platform and they set a deposit limit and a loss limit and maybe a time limit. And then I'm going to give you real-time information about how much money you've spent, and if you've hit those thresholds, and maybe you're going to have to take a little bit of a break before you can come back and play again, because people are more willing to stay and play within their means if they are given real information about what they're doing. People tend to overwhelmingly underestimate how much they're spending and how much time they're engaging in something. There was a great piece of research about this out of Harvard addiction recently, Cambridge Health Alliance, about this. And I think that their research could really revolutionize the way that we are handling this engagement with cashless, with online and sports wagering. So it's about the utilization of tools and also normalizing those tools, because right now so many consumers believe that RG features are only for those that have a problem, and nobody wants to walk into something with a proclamation that I have a problem or I have an issue, right? So what we need to do is move that narrative to everybody does this because that's the safe way to do it. Kind of like everybody has their definition of what's responsible drinking, right? 2 to 3 drinks is what people say, a drink an hour. There's like some basic norms, and we need to do that for gambling, especially under the context of cashless. The other thing is all cashless is not made equal. This has been a point of contention in Nevada. I think Kim might be on. They have had very, very hefty debates around the fact that they allow prepaid cards, which carry this anonymity with them. So moving away or encouraging that if cashless is going to be a thing, that maybe you're not using credit, maybe you're not using prepaid cards, maybe it's e-wallets that are funded through a checking account or a debit account. These are things that also need to be researched a little bit more, but they are good, positive first steps. You know, I think the other component to this is also educating the financial institutions and ensuring that there are ways to self-exclude or ensure that there's blocking against using your credit card to gamble. You know, if we're talking to the Visas and the MasterCards and the Discovers of the world and ensuring that some credit cards won't let you bet on their products. Others have kind of lifted that veil with all of this energy and synergies focused around a maximum sports wagering environment. But there are steps that can be had, and I think a lot of positive opportunities by way of using technology and data and cashless for good within the gambling ecosystem. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. So, you know, great discussions around colleges and the implications. I just want to point out what I found to be most ironic, obviously not how it was intended, but the day the UK Gaming Commission was talking about, and there was much speculation around whether or not they were going to ban the jerseys for soccer or football, whatever you want to call it, from gambling operators, the US announced their very first jersey. I think it just highlights how much the US feels that we are different, or because there's no regulations against this, why not do it? So it was I'd like to say it was a chuckle, but it definitely was difficult. And then look, it's not just the colleges that are signing the deals, right? You guys, the NFL, this tweet announcing its first 3 partners. It has subsequently announced 3 more. They're not alone. The PGA is all in. Pretty much all of the pro leagues are in it. And don't forget where we started. What, my third slide? What was that quote from the MLB? Oh, maybe the dialogue's changing. And now, like I said, BetMGM has a sports book right in the middle of the stadium. And the Washington football team has licenses to actually operate sports wagering in 2 states. But the real thing is all these allegations that are starting to come up. If you haven't seen, there's someone who has come forth with a class action suit against the NFL saying that he was offered significant amounts of money to lose games. If we feel that this is only the beginning of integrity issues, we'll be kidding ourselves as a nation. So I want to direct your attention to the right side of your screen. I wish I could blow it up, but this whole bet 20, get 300. Do any of you know what this is? This was an email sent to every LSU student the other day. Yeah, if you were 21 and over, they tell me you were sent this email. And yes, you guys, that says use code LSU300. The days of gambling and colleges and athletes and just college students in general being kind of a no-go zone are long, long gone. So there it is. An email from a gambling company to a bunch of students to encourage them to spend $20 and you'll get 300. And by the way, you're not getting $300 cash out. This is the other thing that drives me crazy about these promos. They are $300 to bet some more. They are free bets. So you'll get your $20 to bet and $300 more to bet. So now let's encourage college students to bet the $20 they probably couldn't really afford to potentially lose anyway, and let's give them 300 more to keep going. Other things to point on this slide, although I'm pretty sure that email just says all it needs to, is that Arizona, again, we talked about this briefly, they didn't allow all of their tribes who already had gaming facilities to actually apply for licenses for sports wagering, but they did make sure the WNBA Mercury, the NFL Cardinals, the MLB Diamondbacks, and the TPC Scottsdale PGA Tour and the NBA Suns, the Phoenix Raceway at NASCAR, and the Arizona Rattlers all got a license. The days of sports and gambling having a proverbial wall between them are so long gone. So a little bit, I'm trying to, oops. Here are today's headlines. When I first got on this morning, getting ready for today, and I was excited, and I thought, you know what? This isn't just about what happened when I started to put this together. This is literally evolving overnight. So these are some of the things that I woke up to this morning in my inbox, because a record number of West Virginians are going to wager in the Super Bowl. No surprise there. Governor of South Carolina wants to legalize sports betting, and South Carolina doesn't have a whole lot of gambling. Oh, this was a good one, you guys. A headline is that there's now a gaming operation inside Chickies and Pete's. I was like, I don't know what Chickies and Pete's is, but that is now being touted as the first ever race and sports book to open inside a restaurant in the country. So that's exciting, right? And probably my least favorite headline of the day: with sports bets in billions, Colorado still lags on tackling problem gambling. The good news is the subheading is that there is intention to revisit the law, but there is a tradition of a weak commitment to mitigating the damage because Colorado placed 37th out of the nation. So they've got a long way to go. I also love Twitter. It's crazy. Well, okay, I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter, like many of you, I'm sure. But look, we can learn a lot of interesting things out there, especially around gambling. So what I didn't tell you about the Super Bowl and about all of the crazy betting that's going to happen and all of the ads now is that also David Purdum, remember the guy I was saying is really good? Yeah, well, he broke the news that there's actually going to also be an NFL spot on responsible betting for the first time ever in the Super Bowl. And then we also learned just 16 hours ago that in Illinois, the Senate has also made some modifications to sports wagering. And then there's the one in the middle, and it impacts you all. Casinos or gas stations? Where are you going to get your sports wagering? I'm not sure either scenario is good, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of differences if it ends up in just casinos or in gas stations, right? So here, back to someone's question about if I work with policymakers, what can they do? What should they do? The first thing is they need to get educated. And you can help be a part of that. Direct them to resources, direct them to the little research that is out there. Make sure that they're talking to people who understand both the economic and the social implications of expanded gambling, especially sports wagering. Oftentimes we see in committee hearings, all of these experts touted and who will pontificate about the great revenue numbers. And they're not wrong. These revenue numbers are impressive, but nobody's talking about at what cost and what needs to be done to counteract some of that harm. Inclusion, inclusion, inclusion. All legislation, all regulation, all everything about this, including internal policies for gambling operators, really needs to include provisions around what's happening around research, prevention, treatment, and recovery for gambling addiction. And we really need to be separating out problem gambling and responsible gambling, right? Good responsible gambling isn't meant for someone who already has an addiction. That's hopefully measures that are put in place to keep someone gambling in a healthy and safe manner. But equally as important is to make sure that people who do fall through the cracks or do find themselves with an addiction have access to resources and support. Mandating education. Maryland right now has had a bill come up consistently that would mandate education around gambling and problem gambling within all their schools. And I really want to see them be the first mover. And then I want to see all the other states follow suit, because it's done wonders for all the other things like drugs and alcohol and tobacco. Gambling's become so normalized within our culture, but nobody's talking to children about it. Let's mandate it. Let's pay for it. And then the big one, and this is actually a problem in Kansas, is protecting the problem gambling funding. And Kansas isn't alone. There are many states where some legislator or policymaker will say, I want to make sure I do the right thing and set aside some money for problem gambling. But then it's got these other three words, and other addictions. And more often than not, because of things like match grants and politics and just the sheer number of resources, the money doesn't really go for problem gambling the way it was intended or meant. And so ensuring that that funding is protected and not being poached for other very worthy causes, of course, I'm not here to pass judgment, but the point is those funds are there for a reason and they need to be utilized. So protect that money. And it's not just policymakers, it's the regulators. They need to staff up too. They need to get a Liz Lanza. They need to get a Mark Vanderlinden. They need to get responsible and problem gambling experts on staff to see what they can be doing in conjunction with operators to protect the market. And there needs to be consequences for bad actors. There was this horrible, horrible advertisement out in the state of Indiana that basically said by an operator, did you have a bad weekend gambling? Oh, you lost too much? Don't worry about it. It's just money, and then you die. Well, the Indiana regulators didn't appreciate that very much, and they slapped a fine on the operator, and it's since been removed. Now, many might argue, was that fine enough? It wasn't really that high, but it could have serious implications about whether that operator is able to get licensed in another jurisdiction. Or maybe it's just helping them think twice about whether that was really an appropriate thing to put out there. The point is that there has to be some kind of enforcement or consequences for bad actors. And then I can't emphasize this enough, which is why it's been on every single slide about this, is we have to do better as a problem gambling community to streamline systems and collaborate and to be sharing best practices, because I don't really see the need for us to be reinventing the wheel or struggling if others have been able to achieve this seamlessly. So here are my biggest takeaways, and then I think we'll take another quick break. We think we're different. We think we're special, and we are. America is so wonderful. Yet we're doing all of the same things that other more mature markets that have come before us have done, and we're expecting different results. Except we're bigger and we're doing this in a bigger way. So wouldn't the consequences also be bigger? And so that's my last big takeaway. Revenue is high, so high, right? I mean, 100 billion at a handle in 1 month alone in the country, and only 34 jurisdictions have legalized. But so too are the calls for help. Look at this, Tennessee, it grew by an astounding 847% at one call. Connecticut just yesterday again told me about a 30% increase since October. Michigan calls. Virginia Problem Gambling Helpline has seen this. Problem Gambling Helpline in Pennsylvania. Also targeting, I'm hearing a lot about the younger demographic. So sure, the revenue might be high, but so are the rates of harm. And so we have to consider these trends. We have to consider how they will have a trickle-down effect on the harm, and how do we countermeasure them? How do we counter-react to what the industry and policymakers seem to be embracing? And sometimes just saying don't do it isn't going to do anything. So I think it's about being pragmatic, realistic, and working within the system. And when we come back, I think we'll tackle what's happening in Kansas and what that means for the rest of the future for you guys, or, you know, at least next month until a new policymaker files a different bill. So let's take, let's say a 5-minute stretch break this time, because I know we're wrapping up in 45 minutes. So.
Okay, thank you all. We'll start back up at 11:16.
Appreciated because it.
Well, that's because for so long, and many would argue now, and some of you on this call may balk, that day trading and stocks are a form of gambling. But not a lot of people define it or view it that way, right? There's so many misperceptions and misgivings around this topic of gambling. You have to understand that while it has been ingrained in our culture from the start, there's also, this is where I get to put on my other hat. So I have 2 degrees in political science and world religions. There's also a lot of beliefs that are very morally and ethically and just religiously motivated around this topic of gambling. And so there's been a separation between day trading and stocks and making money, and gambling, entertainment, not a way to make money. And anybody who thinks it's a way to make money is someone who we might be concerned has a problem or a relationship with their gambling, right? I think things like Robinhood and these day trading apps have really started to bring to the forefront of policymakers' discussions around this regulation differentiation between state, feds, day trading, stock trading, and gambling. Many folks who are in recovery, though, from gambling addiction would probably tell you they don't touch their 401ks or do any trading because it's a slippery slope. It's not healthy for them. There's a balance. Not something we're also talking to policymakers about. But the big difference here is that gambling has not ever been regulated by the feds. It has always been at the state level. And so I think there's also just been this almost like a great wall of China divide between things like stocks and day trading and gambling, because one is handled and looked at very closely at the federal level, and one is not. One is about as far away as gambling industry would like it to be. In fact, they probably prefer some more separation. I think those days are over, though. I have no reason other than my congressional experience and what I do day in and day out, but I think that those lines are becoming quite blurred. I also think it's important to note that the very people who are on Wall Street and engaged in the stock market every day are at significantly greater risk for struggling with a gambling addiction themselves. And whether that be through their day trading in their stocks or through other products like sports betting, we could talk about that prevalence, although there's little data around that, but they do struggle. I've seen research up to 6 times greater than the general population. Does that help at all?
No, most definitely has. And I was just more thinking of, how we can link that together for federal oversight, because I do agree with you. I think there is a lot of similarities, and how we justify it culturally. I think that's a question. And I think as we sort of explore this, and, the statistics, you talk about the Wall Street, brokers, it's no different from a gaming table person. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of similarities, and the research has, to me, kind of new into this field. I do see a lot of crossover, and I just find it very fascinating how we justify and rationalize the differences.
No, I think you're exactly on it. And look, we cannot be choosy here about how we get in with the feds, right? So frankly, we're open to all suggestions about how to better link this to finally get the feds to start recognizing that gambling addiction is something that they are long overdue paying attention to. So I think it's a great thought. And I think it's something that we should all be talking more to our legislators about. All right, so unless anyone's got any questions, I see some great chats. I actually really can't wait to go back and read all the chats. I apologize that I have not been able to keep up. I hope this means that you're all thinking about this, and I'm saying things that are thought-provoking. But I think now we should really just examine at a very high level about what Kansas is proposing. We spent a lot of time talking about the way other states are doing it. And what's very interesting and not quite uncommon during this process, I've now been intimately involved with about 20 of the 34 states from the beginning drafting process to passage. Your chambers seem to be at very different ends of the spectrum of how to legalize sports wagering. So compromises and modifications will be made. But look, it looks like in your Senate version, you're looking more at a casino-based approach with some mobile. So your sports wagering platforms would happen through websites that are probably attached to those casino brands. Where your House bill, this is where that headlines, casinos or gas stations come from. Here's the one that really struck me. The lottery may contract with up to 1,200 sports wagering retailers who can conduct sports wagering on behalf of the lottery. So, casinos, 1,200 sports wagering retailers, plus casinos, racetrack facilities, and mobile. So, the size of the market is going to be quite different depending on which version is passed. Look, I've not heard 1,200, but if your House version were to pass, you wouldn't be alone. Ohio, they had a bill where bars and restaurants can apply, teams, stadiums. Again, there are states like Rhode Island, Montana, West Virginia, DC that have lotteries that oversee sports wagering. So there are more agents to do that. It really just means, in essence, about the normalization, right? In some cases, it would be more about driving really far for folks to get to a casino to place a bet, or with maybe someone they already have, they'll have a app with. But this could also mean that when I run in to get my milk and fill up my car with gas, I might also be able to, with ease, place a bet. So really, market size. The use of interactive sports platforms, I did not pick them all up. Let me start by saying this was a great thing put out by the state. It's 12 pages. I'd be happy to send the link out to anybody who's interested that compares the two proposals so you can have an idea. I just extrapolated what I thought was the most important for us to discuss today. The Senate version doesn't have this basically tiers of wagering or the types. It just says that a sports wagering manager can use up to 3 platforms and that they'll be approved, where there's a tier 1 and tier 2 wagers, and that platforms will be made available to any casino or racetrack facility manager This just means how many brands, how many levels, what type of wagers, and they are defined a little bit better. I have a synopsis, but we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so who's authorized to conduct sports wagering? Again, where did that one? Why is this? Okay, sporting facilities. So a sporting facility in the Senate version can be contracted to offer sports wagering. All wagering must be conducted through a wagering platform. And there's even a definition that a sporting facility defined as to only mean the Kansas Speedway located in, oh wow, you guys. I mean, I work in a lot of states, but how do you say that county? Wyandotte? Everyone's laughing. Someone jump on.
Wyandotte.
Wyandotte. That's great. Wow, that's good. All right. And then over on the House side, obviously a lot more. The House really decided to build out their version. Racetrack facility. Sports wagering may be conducted as a primary facility, but through devices located at facilities. Marketing agreements must be approved and professional sports team means, and they go on to define it. So there are more options for those professional sports team lines to be blurred. Now, let's jump ahead to this one, the one that we're all talking about here today. What about the problem gambling? Well, your Senate version does say that it would receive 2% of all sports wagering revenues, but hard lessons learned, we want to know more, because does that mean that you're going to allow excise tax deductions, loss carryovers, or promos? Because 2% of 5 million is going to look a lot different than 2% of 500 million, right? So we would care very much about when the disbursement to problem gambling happens. And the House version, on the other hand, says that the annual amount transfer would just go up from 80,000 annually to 100,000. So really no significant changes. The other thing, when I was back with Carol in 2019 and we were working with the legislature, we were trying to tighten up the language as the fund was being poached a lot for other things not intended around problem gambling. So it would be great to see the Senate reconsider that. There is this great article on sportshandle.com about the differences in the Kansas legislation. Nice 6 little bullet points about the biggest differences. I think for you all today, the thing that you should care most about is that in the Senate version, it's a much smaller market in many ways than the House version, in just the opportunities to bet, although mobile is mobile, right? I think we all need to care about the fact that if there is mobile, that leaves a sports book in your pocket. And then of course, for purposes around harm reduction, the Senate is looking to hopefully earmark some money where the House is not. And so ideally that needs to be changed. That's where I was supposed to go last time. So look, what's the call to action? What does all this mean? What's the good? What's the bad? What do we do? Well, it's not been all bad news with sports wagering. In fact, I was really excited to see places like New Hampshire, Virginia, DC, Wyoming, traditionally states that had never done anything around this issue of gambling addiction, finally put something in statute. And in some cases, it wasn't just money, it was a helpline. It was self-exclusion. It was prevention programs. Sports wagering is a game changer. And it can be a really good game changer in the narrative around gambling addiction. We know that gambling addiction has existed for many, many decades, and it had nothing to do with sports wagering. It had to do with bingo and dice and lottery and whatever it was. But for whatever reason, the country's talking about sports wagering. So now is our opportunity to start talking about gambling addiction and get it incorporated into the laws. Maryland has that law for for the first time proposed to mandate education. And most of the time when I go into a state, they'll say, well, who else has done it? Does it work? Nobody really wants to be the first, I have to say, although some will claim they want to be first movers, but then they ask who else has done it. Precedence is everything. If you can get one state to do it, you can almost reliably count that others will follow suit. But that's why it's so important that we leave the state sometimes and talk to others about what's happening and have discussions like this about the state of the nation so we can learn what others are doing and then go back home and talk about it. Virginia and Maryland and DC actually in their legislation all have something known as a Sports Bettor Bill of Rights. It's an entire Bill of Rights dedicated for consumer protections in sports wagering. And by the way, it's available for anybody to use it and include it. It was something I helped draft with Sports Fans Coalition. And we're really excited that there was a consumer-centric facing part of the law. Pennsylvania. Liz, I don't know if you're on, but Liz is literally one of the best, if not the best in this industry when it comes to regulations and working from a regulatory side on addressing this issue of problem and responsible gambling. And they require all of the things at the bottom of your screen, in their words, to install certain speed bumps and off-ramps to help gamblers and their loved ones avoid the consequences of full-fledged irresponsible gaming. They're talking about resources to things in the communities. They're talking about requirements for operators to maintain their licensure to operate within the state. They have made a significant investment in research. I just actually read a piece of data around problem gambling and prevalence rates that was statutorily mandated. They have self-exclusion programs for everything. They have cooling off periods. They have mandates for informed decision-making so customers know what they're doing and how much time and money they're spending on online and mobile gaming. Pennsylvania is a leader and they're doing good stuff. And I'm pretty sure they'll be okay if we start replicating what they're doing. It's one of those times it should be flattery to poach it, right? But the thing that I see as being the Achilles heel for all of us and the industry is going to be the advertising. You know, ad spend by sports companies alone hit $1.2 billion in 2021, and it's anticipated to grow this year. This is the one that really scared me. Analysts predict that DraftKings and FanDuel, just two of the many companies, are going to spend $400 million on ads in the next 3 years. How many ads does that get us? Not every ad goes at the rate of $7 million for a 30-second spot like for the Super Bowl. How many ads is that? And how do we even begin to counteract that? And what are the implications of that many ads? These numbers are staggering. And it's really, really hard for consumers to be able to understand truth in advertising or what it means when we're confronted with things like this. $1,000 risk-free bet. What is a risk-free bet? There is no such thing as a risk-free bet. Anytime I bet it comes with a risk, I could become addicted. Also, I'm not able to cash that out. Where does that say? I also want to draw your attention back to our cashless conversation. See under the red line where it says get bonus? Look, it even tells me that I can pay with my Apple Pay, my Visa card. We are making it very, very, very easy for people to take advantage of these promo and advertising deals. And look, some of the states that have legalized since almost the beginning of PASFA being overturned are starting to really worry about the advertising. Director Reebok, he oversees the commission in New Jersey. He came out very strongly at the end of last year and told the operators to get together and get it together because he is tired of the sheer quantity of advertisements. He is absolutely exhausted by the confusing terms for the bonuses that could be defined as misleading consumers, and the utter lack of emphasis on responsible gambling. He no longer considers it acceptable, and he never really has. He's been a tremendous ally within this world to just have a helpline number in size 4 font at the bottom and calling it a good RG message. And he did say that if the industry couldn't get it together, that he would step in and they wouldn't like it. And he's not alone. Dan Hartman in Colorado, the Speaker of the House, Alec Garnett in Colorado, have also said the same, that they are getting calls about the sheer number of advertisements, the lack of truth and transparency in those advertisements, and they're feeling that they may have to step in. And I think it would be wise for the rest of the nation to see how that is handled and the significant difference, hopefully for the positive, that can come from that, because it would be better to enact those stringent regulations from the start instead of waiting for so much harm to come and then having to go back and fix it. It's advertising, it's cashless, it's these tax deductions. We could point to a whole host of things. I think it's just the perfect storm, and nothing about the policy and the legalization should be discounted for having an impact or a potential impact on the ramifications of harm that can and will come. Now, it is not all doom and gloom, but there must be a shared responsibility by all those that are a part of this. It starts with the legislators, moves to the regulators, but the community partners and the experts and those that are in recovery, anybody who is going to be engaging with this or exposed to this, which is pretty much everyone, needs to be a part of the discussion about how to embark upon this legalization. And I also think, while the operators need to get their act together, this is I think the problem gambling and responsible gambling community needs to get it together too. Should we talk about a national approach or best standards to approaching harm prevention and reduction? Do we have best practices for self-exclusion and helpline? Are we talking enough about them? What about best practices in funding and protection? What do we do about these 25 helplines? There was a great article on ESPN that highlighted the difference between why someone would want to see a national helpline versus an autonomous one run by the state. But at the end of the day, how are we going to address this? Like I said, it's going to be great to see the Caesars ad, except if I'm in Virginia, I can't get that help. So then what? And then, of course, enforcement. So we need to collaborate, innovate, have some respect for one another and our differences. We got to get better about information sharing. I like to say we need to speak up. We need to speak out. Now is the time. Policymakers are listening, maybe not for always the best of intentions. A lot of it is predicated on awesome new revenue streams for them, but nonetheless, they are listening. And so we only have ourselves to blame if we don't start talking about all these other things that will come with sports wagering. So I promised you the good and the bad, and there's a whole lot of good that's been happening, I want to say, and I'm really excited to see more of it. So I've pulled lots of bad headlines. Let's pull some good ones, shall we? So Craig Carton, someone who has a very public job, he's a radio figurehead. He uses his show now every Saturday to talk about gambling addiction. Playtech and Kindbridge, they're a telehealth healthcare system centered around gambling, problem gambling, gaming. They've embarked upon some research together. DraftKings is working with the Division on Addiction at Cambridge Health Alliance at Harvard to look at a comprehensive responsible gaming program. They also just made a $1.75 million commitment, giving money for 3 years to every council affiliated with the National Council on Problem Gambling. The state of New York set aside $6 million annually for gambling addiction services in their sports wagering bill. And then there are these. So I've been really hard on operators today. I hope they'll forgive me, but some of them really are stepping up. And so I'm excited to show you all this.
When you're a quarterback, maintaining control is critical. Control of the clock, control of the game.
We want you to enjoy Caesars Sportsbook app, and we wish you success.
The Caesars Sportsbook app has the tools to help you set time limits, deposit limits, and spin limits. Please use them.
And if you are ever struggling to control your gambling, please seek help and support by dialing 1-800-522-4700.
You are all Caesars, and even Caesars need to know their limits.
Thank you.
Look at that. An operator has an ad dedicated solely to responsible gambling. When was the last time we saw an ad with names like the Mannings dedicated to a responsible gambling message? Oh, and they're not alone. And this is the one.
When you're a quarterback,
I can't promise, but could be potentially, I don't know, in the pregame show. Let's see.
That's the game plan. Stick to it.
Did you guys see who did that? The NFL, a league that takes a lot of money, earns a lot of money from gambling, has a responsible gambling ad. How great would it be to see the Super Bowl not only have the first 3 ads from gambling entities, but be the first Super Bowl with a responsible gambling ad that looks like that? Now, there's also the Have a Game Plan run by the AGA that has loads of members from teams to operators to a venture capitalist group that talk about promoting having a game plan and knowing how to embark upon sports wagering in a responsible, safe manner. Now, it's a start, right? I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not even saying that they got it all right, but I do believe in giving credit where it's due. And then there's 2 ads that I want to show you that I think the gambling operations need to aspire to just take it to that next level. Because what did we kind of get out of those 2 ads, right? We got seriousness and we got a little bit of a lecture, right? Someone was telling us about staying safe. And it really didn't encapsulate the brand. We didn't really see the Caesars brand per se. And what I'm going to argue is, as things evolve in sports wagering, and as we want to talk about how to effectively engage with demographics and talk to them about responsible practices in gambling, we need to invest in high quality, good marketing practices, brand specific ways to get a hard message across without looking like we're lecturing. And I think the alcohol industry kind of does it right sometimes. So I've got 2 ads for you as kind of a fun way to close before we go into our final Q&A, and I hope you like them too.
Nico Rosberg takes the championship 34 years after his father. It's like father, it's like son.
A child arrived just the other day. He came to the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch and bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away, and he was talking for I knew it. And as he grew, he'd say, I'm gonna be like you, Dad. You know I'm gonna be like you. And the cats in the cradle and the silver spoon, little boy building the man on the moon. When you're coming home, Dad, I don't know when, but we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. My son turned 10 just the other day. He said, thanks for the ball, Dad, come on, let's play. Can you teach me to throw? I said, not today, I got a lot to do. He said, that's okay. And then he walked away, but his smile never did. It said, I'm gonna be like him. Yeah, you know I'm gonna be like him.
Would you like something to drink?
No thanks, I'm driving.
Zero alcohol.
And the cats in the cradle and the silver spoon. Little boy blue and the man on the moon. When you're coming home, son, I don't know when, but we'll get together then.
So I understand that was like a minute long and they cut it up, but look, it is a father and a son, and they're quite famous around, driving. And also, what's the Heineken brand? It's approachable, it's sexy, it's sunny, it's all those things were conveyed in this message, yet it had a really powerful and important thing, right? So maybe we can move away from the lecturing, but right now I know I can't, beggars can't be choosers, and we've got an RG spot, so I'll take it. But here's another one. This one's much shorter, but I like this one too.
Another crown?
Let's have a water this round, please.
You got it. Here's your water.
Thank you.
Stay hydrated and stay royal. Take a water break and moderate your drinking on game day.
And also, if you notice, the message or the warning came afterwards, but everybody was interested. Everyone was invested. It was a famous figurehead that's talking and representing the brand. And he does commercials that have nothing to do, obviously, with water breaks. It represents Crown otherwise. But I just think there's some really good lessons to be learned there, and how to market and engage with those that we want to receive positive messages and important messages. And it will resonate better, right, than someone being lectured at. Just like those RG tools, if they're presented as something that only people with a problem have and utilize, they're less inclined to do it, instead of viewing it as a way to stay healthy while gambling. So here are just some other things that I think are noteworthy. FanDuel ended up buying and doing a partnership with Gamban. That is a blocking software company that will be downloaded on your phone and block any ability to access a gambling app. And that was done in collaboration with a gambling operator. Entain, another gambling operator, they own half of the BetMGM brand. They have an entire app. It's called Gamble Responsibly America. Lots and lots of good things. And so, my call to action to all of you is that we talk about this more, that we understand both the economic and the social benefits that come, and also the consequences from legalized sports wagering, that we do a lot better for one another by information sharing and talking about best practices, and then also holding everyone accountable, from those data providers and the leagues and the teams to the operators to the community partners. Really, there is so much to be done that none of us can do it alone. I think that sports wagering, while it is concerning in many ways, also bodes itself for many wonderful opportunities. And now is the time for us to be talking about gambling addiction more than ever, and what we can all be doing to mitigate and reduce the harms that come from it. So with that, I think we have 12 minutes. I would love to take some of those questions or hear what's been going on in the chat, if I may, and just see where folks are at. Chad, what's been going on? Catch me up to speed.
All right, thanks, Brianne. Yeah, and so lots of good comments on there in the chat. A lot of points that were made and kind of information shared from people's their specific states where they're at, and some legislation that folks are looking at. Recent in the chat, there was a comment from Jerry about an alternative safe gambling definition, including a few different points. And so, Jerry, feel free to unmute and share that aloud. But yeah, lots of good conversation, I think, that flowed along with what you were talking about. So if anybody feels like their question was missed in the chat, definitely ask it aloud here.
I also see Liz Lanza put in her email address.
Yeah.
Thanks, Liz. I had no idea she was going to be on. I wrote this presentation and talk about the great work she does, and I had no idea. Sarah Reminiscus, it's in the UK. You hung in there. Thanks so much. Sarah is a wealth of knowledge. I see she's putting links to great research. Everybody should click on that. Jerry, what were you talking about? I want to make sure we give you space if you want to check about it.
Looks like we may have lost Jerry
Lost
too.
Jerry.
Yeah, I know that at least he had video earlier. So
It's been 3 hours, everyone. Thanks for everybody who hung in there. I hope this was informative and helpful. Yes, my slides will be available. Yes, you've seen many commercials for Caesars, but not that one. So I have to say, hopefully you'll start seeing a lot more of it. It is fairly new, but I have seen it a few times in games, and I am being told you will see a lot more of it. Yes, Jeff. Jeff Wasserman says to everyone, now if they would eliminate all the free play offers and predatory marketing strategies, we'd all be better off. Yeah, I think that's going to be the other Achilles heel that kind of goes in tandem with the advertising, right? It's not sometimes just about the sheer number of advertisement, but what is the content of those advertisements. As we talked about early on, Spain did ban those promo and bonus offers. They do have affordability checks that they will run that will determine if people are eligible for certain promos and bonus offers. You know, I do have a lot of questions and concerns here about whether or not affordability checks would stand up in litigation. It's kind of those differences between the US and European countries, but you know, look, Jeff, it's only sustainable for so long for these entities to be offering these promo and bonus offers. They are not really making money right now. Right now, it's all just about customer acquisition. It won't be too long before we see a shift from customer acquisition to customer retention. You know, what we've seen is that loyalty from customers is fleeting. It's actually about the brand right now, or about the product. It's about the promo deals that they're being offered. And so because we know that that is not sustainable for these companies long-term to be making money, I do think we are going to see a gradual decrease. Now, I'm not making excuses. I don't like them either. I feel that they encourage excessive bad play. But I do think that there is something for us all to consider about the economics of the market and just about sustainability from their end. I don't know how accurate I am going to be about those forecasts, but I just don't see it being able to sustain at this level for even another year. They are in the red some months because they're offering so many promo deals and bonuses just to get people signed up. And I think they're all quickly realizing that the loyalty is not there. People are jumping from app to app just based upon the bonus offers, excuse me. So now they got to start caring about the content and their platforms and differentiating themselves from their competitors, because they want to retain these guys. But good point well made and understood.
Brianne, this is Susan from Minnesota. Great to see you. Thanks for a great presentation. Have you seen any legislation written that limits the bonus play, and has there anything that's been approved?
No, so what I'm seeing is not limiting in bonus and promo play in dollars from operators, but limiting in how much they can deduct. So in some cases, though, that is that's still attractive, right? Because if they can only deduct 20%, then they probably won't be as liberal with their promo offers because they're thinking about, well, they're thinking about their tax liability, right? So the other thing I have seen, Arizona was the first one, I believe, to do this, where it's a tier down for the deductions in the amount. So they can deduct the most from their promos and bonus offers year one, a little less year two, a little less year three, and then not at all. That's the only restrictions I'm seeing by way of promo and bonus offers, which does have an impact on what the operators do put out there. Because again, they care about their bottom line every month.
Sure. Thanks.
Good question, though. And it's so good to see you. Thanks for joining. I'm really trying to keep up, but now I thought I was making headway and there's 28 new messages. So if anybody has something, please speak up, because I want to make sure I get to you. Oh, everybody's being kind. Thank you. Thanks for sticking with me. Look, we'll make sure that these slides are available. Chat, I'm getting asked, how are they going to become available? Are you going to email them out?
Yeah, we will. I'll be sharing the slide deck and the recorded workshop video with Carol, and I think Carol will help us share that out either from the coalition or from the state.
Awesome. Well, anytime I'm here, please don't be shy. I want to hear what's going on. I want to hear how I can support you all. I really try to live and breathe what I preach here. And that means that information sharing and that collaboration and coordination. And we are only as strong as our weakest state and our weakest player in this industry. And so the more I can understand what's happening on the ground, and in your communities and through your policies, the better I can also hopefully help others that are coming, or maybe put people in touch. The one thing I've been most grateful for my time is meeting people like you and having the wide spanning network that I do have, because I do have the good fortune of working with the legislators, regulators, operators, and the lovely folks like you all fighting the good fight every day to work with those that are struggling. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your commentary. Thank you for 3 hours of your Thursday morning. I hope you all have a great day. And like I said, please, I wish I had put my social media. I'm very present on Twitter and LinkedIn, but please reach out and thank you again.
Brianne, thank you so much for everything. And I was kind of blown away with the people that were in attendance from all over the world. So even though this was a Kansas sponsored event, I think what you shared, both, policy and practice, applies to everybody. And you said it better than I can. I think the more that we can come together doing the same kinds of things, the better off, we'll be at least across the United States.
I think so. And I think now is the time, right? I think
yes,
they're capitalizing on their opportunities. We might as well too.
Absolutely. And I wish you could be here all the time.
Oh, you're very kind to say that. I'm always a phone call away anytime. And I'll probably be coming to Topeka so we can fight the good fight and get that 2% in the House version, aren't right? Yes. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for your attendance.